think that's going. I think the title is going to come back to us during the course of our discussion.
Yes.
But in the exhibition does have a subtitle that's a quote from Rachel Carson. In nature, nothing exists alone. So I wanted to ask you, because Rachel Carson is from another time almost. Do you go back that far with these thoughts and feelings?
I think I probably do, but I didn't articulate them. I think my family tradition was always to notice natural things in our environment. We lived in a rather lovely spot, which is no longer as lovely. And rather a similar situation to the place where we live now, which is on the edge of Wolvercote, which is very green, but we're rather bothered by the A34 noise and very bothered by it. And so although we see the natural world, we're aware of the natural world, we hold on to it, we grip it rather, because it seems to be constantly threatened. I was made aware of birds and birdsong by my parents, particularly my mother. And I used to go on very long walks with my father. And I think I grew up understanding that these things were very important. And I now know that they were much more numerous then than they are now, and that we've lost so much, and it gets lost so gradually and almost imperceptibly. And that's the scary thing, that one year you might see a bullfinch and the next year you won't see one. No. And it's that. A lot of people don't know what a bullfinch is, for example. So yes, in a way, I wasn't studying Rachel Carson, but she has obviously said things that chime with us now as strongly, and maybe more strongly than they did when she was writing. And yeah.
And this exhibition you describe as the work appearing during lockdown and beyond. So do you think that this sentiment of Rachel Carson's "in nature nothing exists alone," do you think that's something that many of us got closer to during lockdown? Did you get closer to it in lockdown?
I think I did. I mean, when I did the show Lace Weight in 2019, I was talking about nature and the interlinking between human life and the natural world. That was exactly what the theme was of that show, and this show is no different. But I was talking in this show about the fact that everybody really became very much more aware of the natural world, because we had nothing to do but walk into it, and we had our one walk a day, and people were looking through their windows at the natural world and remarking on the silence and the clear skies and the differences. And here I became aware, as lockdown ceased, that gradually, bit by bit, and rather fast, too fast for me, the world went back to its usual noisy, careless state. And this is really what this exhibition is largely saying, that we should hold on to the lockdown lessons and notice, because if we notice, then we complain if things are being threatened. And these things are really part of our lives, and we don't remain physically or mentally or emotionally healthy without this connection with the natural world. We were impoverished, and nobody's talking about it. Well, everybody's talking about it, but people are talking about it, but a very, very rarefied few people are talking about it. I think it's a very sort of, it's a few of us, I think, and I read a lot of books about it, and it seems I read the same thing over and over again, but still nothing.
But there's talking about it, and there's going on the journey ourselves, isn't there?
Yes, yes.
So I'm going to leave Rachel Carson, but in a moment, because one of the ways that you work as an artist, it seems to me, is you work through a series of projects.
Yeah.
We focus on projects, and they are one of the aspects of your practice that's important. But unlike some artists, your projects are they feel to me as if they're porous, so they link to one another. Sometimes in a linear way, but often just with a myriad of little links. And so that, you know, to me, that's another reflection of this sentiment that in nature, nothing exists alone. And in some ways, none of your work exists alone.
No.
Yes,
absolutely.
Do you think that's right?
Yes, I'm saying the same thing. I'm just saying it in different ways with different media, I think. Yeah. I'm just discussing the same thing constantly.
So I think that's important for our viewers who haven't seen the show, and maybe one or two have not seen an exhibition of yours in the past, that you work in these projects, and we're now going to start looking at some of the work, and the work is grouped in those projects.
Yes.
Yes.
And as it appears in the show here.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if we could start to see the work now, and the first group that we're going to look at is called the Untidied Garden. So tell us about that. What's the Untidied Garden?
Well, we gradually, before lockdown, came to the conclusion that our garden really had some really rather wonderful places in it. And we started off really with a pond quite a long time ago, and then increased the size of the pond. And we were pretty much in awe of what we saw there and what emerged from it. And we now have great crested newts. We discovered them last year. So it just gets better and better. And we discovered, I think we both discovered, my husband and I discovered that we have a very long garden, and the garden has many rooms to it. And the rooms all seem to have, or many patches, many places, but they're like rooms in a house. And they all seem to serve a different purpose. And so what we decided to do in lockdown, whereas our neighbours actually were quite understandably rather sorting their gardens out, getting rid of weeds, as they call them, and fretting about things and really rather stressing and using a lot of machinery, we did the opposite. We just decided to watch what would happen if our garden really wasn't mown and wasn't disturbed, and what the garden would decide to do with that opportunity. And I think we noticed immediately that the insects were astonishing and so much more numerous, and we just produce pollinators now for our vegetable growing. We do grow vegetables, but we produce the pollinators for the vegetables that are grown elsewhere, I think. It just became interesting. And for me, the garden is a wilderness that I will never understand. You can't understand it completely, and my intention is not to document it, to list what's in it, but just to walk in it and marvel at it. And
and is that in the work in this series, someone who didn't know your work would, if something entitled with the word garden in the title, they'd immediatly think green. But the pieces in this series don't have any green in them at all. No. So
well, I've played with it. I mean, I tend to use colour in an emotional way. So if I find I use gold to show that I value something that other people might not value, such as a wild plant growing past its flowering season even. The shapes are highlighted because I use bright pinks and golds and yellows and oranges. So I think I just play with the colour. I don't stick to real colour. No. Or yes, these are abstract. They're ideas that come from spending a lot of time in a garden that is purposefully left alone, purposefully untidied, and wild. We intentionally wild it, or let it does itself.
You're avoiding the word rewild, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yes. Why is that?
Well, I think it's overused, and I just feel that yes, it's an interesting question, because yes, I think this is called Wilderness Bewilderness because I am still in the process of being bewildered by the subject. I'm not saying I have any answers. The wilderness part of it is a mystery to me. I don't really understand what we mean by wilderness. I do know, though, that I need to have a place to go to where I don't know all the answers, I don't know what's there, and I'm surprised by things. Yeah. And these drawings really are showing the potential that people ignore, I think, of the shapes of a garden when it is gone beyond its flowering stage, beyond its useful, so-called useful stage, where actually it comes into its own and becomes extremely useful to the natural world.
So the decay, as well as
the decay and the seeding and yes, all sorts of the dandelion head, but also the rough bits that you itch to do something to tidy, but I'm untidying. Yeah.
Let's see the other one we've got in the series here, the pink one. Yes.
Yes. So that's the negative shapes in there, and in the following one, I think we have one called Negative Shapes. Or
yes,
maybe that's
this one.
Yes, that's the negative shapes where.
Yes.
This
is like the space between.
Yes.
What's growing, is it?
Yes, that. I find that as an artist really interesting. That I spent many years trying to draw the positive outlines of things, and I then became interested in what happens between them, and I think, yeah, I can look at that and I can't learn it, and that really for me is quite an important drawing, because I can't learn my garden. I look at it and it changes every day, and a gardener, a conventional gardener, would find that very frustrating. Yeah. And I find it very thrilling. So.
And do we think that it may be that some of our fellow travellers, insects and birds and mammals, this is what they see? Maybe. We don't know, do we?
No, we don't know, but they inhabit that tangled space that we itch to tidy. And if you don't tidy it, there they are, and they do good stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Tidiness, it's a problem. So let's move to the second group, really. This is a group of images of a hawthorn tree. Now, it's a hawthorn tree that's deeply familiar to you.
Absolutely. In lockdown, I have a studio at Wilcott Arts, as Nikki Laird said, but yes, I used to work in a shed studio in the garden, and in fact I still do some printing there, but it's mostly a storage shed now. But in lockdown I did a lot of drawing. I did these drawings there, and in front of me was this iconic tree, and it's known as a scrubland tree. The word scrubland is like the word weed. It's loaded with disgust and disdain, but actually it's the thing that we should be valuing. And I think I'm right, that there are over 300 species of insect that actually thrive on a hawthorn. Therefore, this tree will feed the birds that come into the garden. We have many, many lovely birds because we are on the edge of a woodland Wolvercote Lakes Reserve, so we're extremely lucky. But our hawthorn, when we first moved into the house, was a little more than 20 foot high, and we've been there for 31 years, and it's a massive tree, as you know.
Yeah.
And I decided, because we weren't traveling anywhere, we weren't going anywhere, we were stuck. I loved it. I decided to record the life of the garden, and particularly the life of the hawthorn. So I did some very meticulously drawn, careful drawings of the hawthorn, and to respect it, to give it the respect that I think it really deserves. It's a stunning thing to have in one's garden.
So this series came out of a lot of sketching of this one individual tree.
Well, this one is actually also part of the Look Outside project that we'll
come on
discuss
to. Okay.
later. But yes. In lockdown, it was very much a lockdown objective to try to get these drawings.
And it feels to me that these have a Japanese feel to them, partly in the treatment that you've used, but also in this very long portrait format.
Yeah.
Is that a conscious thing, or have you had some influence in that way, or
is
it just something that's happened?
It is a very long, tall tree. Maybe that's maybe that's it. I don't know. I don't really know why they are in that format, but I rather enjoy it. I didn't want them to be square. It wasn't like a photograph, or it was a moment in my vision of the tree. So I suppose that must be how I saw it. I was through a narrow window. It was looking through a narrow window at this particular section, and I think maybe that's how.
Yeah. Let's see the next one, because the next one, nothing can prepare us for the shock of the blossom. Is well, it's where we are now in May, isn't it?
Yes, it's doing this again.
It's doing this right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it is a shock. You think you're going to be ready for it, and then you look out one morning, and it just is completely stunning.
Intense, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I had no idea how to do that one, but I managed it. I was so determined to do that one. And I found them very difficult, these. I found that, if you made a mistake, it wasn't easy to.
This to me really does feel
hard.
Oriental somehow. Maybe it's the way that the treatment of the blossom.
Yeah.
It's stunning. I love this one. Thank you. Yeah. And then the third one, you just call Result.
Well, yes, a very poor title. I normally really.
No, it's a great title.
Well,
I love it.
I'm not sure. I really work. My titles are intentional, and I really think about them very carefully. But this. I just felt I needed to do this one to complete the story. It completes the story. It just tells you that if you leave things, you get these berries that some people find very irritating because they're all over the ground, and they hurt if you're going around in bare feet. And it's an inconvenient tree. It's really, but it's extremely useful. And
and as you were saying earlier, it is a tree that's seen somehow as a second order.
Oh, absolutely.
Some people would probably only regard it as as you say, scrub, but not a real tree.
No, it's often found in hedgerows, and I think if it grows up, it might get cut, and that's fine, because in a hedgerow it does a very good job, but you very rarely see them on their own doing this marvelous tall.
And maybe that's a tidiness thing, because in earlier cultures on these islands, hawthorns were a source of spirit. Very important.
They are very important still for some. Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next project, the company of everything else. Now,
well, this is really part of that same project. In 2019, I used the same frame to record 130 women wearing a woolen shawl that I'd knitted, and then I've later destroyed, made into something else for the exhibition here at the North Wall Laceweight. And I think that I just wanted to make the point. The company of women, they were my network of female connections that I felt were very important to my life. And maybe I didn't know them very well, but they were very much part of who I was and why I was here, and part of what I was doing. And I thought this time it would be important to put the garden in these 130 tiny little sections and honor that. And the company really does mean almost like a a firm, a company. I imagine the garden is working for us. It's providing everybody with clean air and a lot of interest, a lot of fun, but also it's doing a very, very good job in the natural world. And this is recognizing that if we all had a natural piece of land, we gave a piece of our garden to the natural world and didn't disturb it, then we would vastly improve the situation of polluted air in England, which is particularly bad. We're living in very bad air. Oxford has awful air. So it's, yes, there was that lovely statistic, wasn't there, that something the size of Wales, a fifth of the size of Wales,
right, yes.
if we were all to give our gardens over to the natural world without disturbing, it would be, the area would be the equivalent to the fifth of the size of Wales.
Yes.
Or
the equivalent to a larger area than all the national nature reserves in the country put together.
That is the stunning one. That's absolutely crazy. I'm not suggesting that we all let our gardens do what ours is doing. There's a huge movement, garden centre movement, and a huge business which encourages us to do the absolute opposite. But if we were to go somewhere towards it, and neighbourhoods were to maybe link these places, then the situation would be so much better for our health, our mental health as well. That's something we don't necessarily understand, but living in concrete, I don't think it does people any good at all. So you need the greenery, you need the...
And in this piece, you by presenting a whole series of images of what is a very small area, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We've just been talking about the scale of private gardens across the country, but your untidied garden is actually...
It's narrow.
It is, and it's a small area. You're presenting it in this with this grid of images, all equal, all equally weighted. Is there something about that we're looking at something without without seeing any one part of it being I think, more important than the other?
Well, yes, because who am I to know which bit is doing the best work at the moment, which part of the company is actually producing the best air or the best. I have no idea. I just know that this garden is doing a huge amount of good. Also, I want to say that this is not necessarily just my garden. This in the show, this is my garden, but it could be anybody's. So if I produced it in that way, everybody could do that.
Everybody with a garden, untidied or otherwise,
and
could do this.
Yes. And I'm also really aware that not everybody has a garden, and that the new estates that are being built have very, very tiny places, maybe just room for a table and chairs and a sun umbrella. And that's very bad news for them and for all of us. So perhaps I'm talking even going further than my lucky situation. I'm just hoping that perhaps people will wake up to the fact that this is an essential part of our existence, everybody's existence, and a human right, really. We have a bit of greenery.
Great. So we're now going to go on to the next project that linked back to this, but we're going to go on to the next project. Oh, we're still on the company.
Oh, well, yes, those are the three
details.
Detail. Yes, this is the Look Outside project, which is actually behind us in the gallery. This was an open call for short phrases, written phrases of observations of the natural world at a time of limited freedom. So that was in lockdown. I didn't know what it was going to produce, and I had over 200 replies to it, and they came in from all corners and across the world, and I had some lovely comments. A lot of coyotes seemed to pop up in it, which was very... and so from that, I obviously produced the 3D piece behind us with the comments in it, but also what people gave me, the comments that people gave me produced the titles for several pieces of work, and I'm still making work from these phrases. And this is one that.
So we'll look at the presentation of the overall project in a moment. We're going to see a number of pieces that they've emerged during your lockdown out of the Look Outside project. So just while we're looking at this one, all of the titles of these projects have come, they're phrases that have come from this interaction. Now, you've used interaction before in your practice, haven't you? You mentioned before that the relationship with the women and the shawl.
Yes.
So this idea of sourcing and connecting with other people it's part of the way that you work, isn't it? I
like working like that because in fact it releases me from dilemmas. It releases me from, not from responsibility, it gives me huge responsibility to get things right. But it releases me from the terrible question that artists have, which is, why am I doing, what am I doing, and why am I doing it? Which is a real big one. It's a real big, and if you don't know why you're doing something, then actually it's tremendously hard to get into a zone in which you produce anything interesting. So these and
tell us a little bit then about, because there's the series of paintings here, and we're just going back and forth through them a little bit there. Obviously these phrases, they're like almost little poems, aren't they, that have come back
prose
to you.
Poetry,
Is that, are you making a connection between a phrase and something that you're experiencing, or are you experiencing something and a painting just evolves, and then, you know, what's the relationship between the phrase, which has come from completely externally, and I sense that some of what the paintings are about are still about what's going on immediately around
I
you,
think
as
though
well
that,
as
I think though that we were all pretty much in the same zone. People who were offering these things were also in lockdown, also unable to walk very far to travel, and were on daily walks, but you know, these walks were limited. And so yes, I did bring in my experience. I mean, and this one, for example, the lark, is a Port Meadow, so it's a local lark, and we all walked on Port Meadow, huge distances from one another, waving, but we were all hearing larks in the purest, clearest air, because it was very clean air, because we had no air traffic, and any sound could be picked up. So the birds that would normally have to shout and are back to shouting again, were able to communicate much more easily. And so we were stunned by, we all remarked on the silence, which is very hard to paint, and I so far haven't managed to do it, and the sound that we noticed of the natural world.
So then let's just briefly go on to the image of the installation itself, which it is behind us, but you see a detail of it here. And this is made up of all of the words that were sent to you.
I had no idea how to do it, and it was a huge problem for me, and I had to really do a lot of other things and put it on a back burner because I had no idea how to honor the people that had taken the trouble to give me these words. And then I realized that really I just needed to put them all together with no spaces. And I was working on a miniature typewriter, miniature manual typewriter, so making lots of mistakes. I picked this typewriter up from the street. It had been left outside somebody's house unwanted, so it suited brilliantly. And I made lots of mistakes, and then covered those mistakes with respectful gold pen, highlighting the mistakes, and then trapped it in onto paper that had been altered with ink, on the shoreline, when we did finally go to Brittany, on the shoreline of a Breton beach, with the water and the sand and the rocks there, and then trapped between two pieces of glass to look like a window. So it's I'm very pleased with how it's turned out, but it was a huge problem for me to work out how to do it. It was
so it's a window.
Yeah.
It's a prose poem. It's a concrete poem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. And it provided another link to the next project, the Wall of Sound.
Well, this is still a Look Outside project piece, but it has sound in it. So these are linked. But then I started drawing birdsong in the garden. And then the birdsong, I realized how much it was being covered by man-made sound as that came back into our lives.
Have you tried to paint sound before?
I have painted sound before. Yes, I have been doing that for a few years. Yeah. Yes, it's a very intriguing, very difficult thing for me to do. I don't know. A lot of people are doing it very successfully, but I like to have a dilemma. I like to have a struggle. I don't like to do things that I find easy. Very perverse, but I'm really interested in sound, and I do hear birdsong. I can't necessarily tell you what the birds are because I don't catalogue them. I'm getting better at it. But,
okay. So, and this was one of the early ones of
This was one of the early ones when things were seemed very loud in the garden, very loud indeed, and deafening. In fact, sometimes
it looks loud.
It is loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I went on to think about sound, and if we would go on to the next, the Wall of Sound, this was one of my, and this is in the exhibition, this is the A34 with the black cap, the three regularly spaced patches at the top, which fades out before the road gives up. Our road is bothersome and seems to become louder every year. And the birds are actually, apparently, singing earlier in the morning while the road hasn't
built up its volume.
Yeah. And then they also sing far more loudly. So they are being affected because they're not getting enough rest. So
and most of these pieces in this Wall of Sound project are they're a juxtaposition of a bird song, the natural world, and then man-made sound.
Yes.
So
most of them are.
Yeah. So let's see that the next one. That's the tawny owl on the A34.
Yes. Tawny owl, call and response. It's a heart-rending sound. This would have been. Really, I would have heard this at something like 4 in the morning, and the road really blots it, really gets in the way. And that one isn't in the exhibition, actually. This was just one that is very typical of the work that I've been doing.
The skylark and the siren, which is the next one, that is in the exhibition, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. The skylark is a very sort of silvery, very complicated sound, which obviously I can't absolutely replicate, but is a regular sound nonetheless. If you look at it, there are regular bursts of song, and the siren is regular, unfortunately. And then the patch at the bottom shows the level of sound that rather purpley bit, that's the level of sound we hear all the time.
The background.
In the background, that's all the time. Okay. So there's the shifting bass line. We never had that. Now we have it, we think it's normal. So when there's silence in lockdown,
that's taken away.
That's remarkable. That's remarkable. That should be normal, but is no longer normal.
And the next, and the final one in this series here, there are more in the exhibition. Next door's chickens. So
that's a bit more light-hearted. I do keep a sketchbook of sound and a passing prop plane. People couldn't really fly for a while, and then they suddenly came, and I was struck by the fact that there was a little plane in the sky pottering over. And I don't suppose it would disturb a chicken at all. So that's slightly just observing to
Yeah.
man-made and natural sound.
And the penultimate project we're going to look at, the Wild Plants Street Party, which viewers may see is hanging from the ceiling of the gallery. Now, this links to another project in your previous exhibition.
Yeah. In the previous exhibition, I had the same photographs that are printed here. I had them on a lectern in a rather beautiful album, and I didn't reference them at all. I made no reference to them. They were just there waiting to come into the next exhibition. And then I try to refer to a previous exhibition and to a future exhibition when I put a show of work on. In this case, I took them out of the album, printed them onto an ordinary sheet, which was dyed with the colour of wild plants, and then used a printing technique to print onto these pieces of material. And then it's 13 meters of hand sewn. It took me absolutely ages. And they look rather, unlike bunting, which is normally really rather sharp, the colours are normally rather sharp and flashy. These are the street plants that had their moment of glory when the council no longer poisoned them. And now I've observed they are back to poisoning them again, but they did have a wonderful moment in the lockdown where they grew lush and flowered and had their whole lives.
And their colours here in the gallery they're organic and,
yes,
and luminous, beautiful, very beautiful. So the last project takes the title from the exhibition. This is Wilderness Bewilderness.
Yes.
And it's a series of landscapes, and seascapes.
Yeah.
They're not actual places. I think that's important, isn't it?
Yeah.
Although actual places must have influenced them, because you spend a lot of time.
I spend a lot of time in wild places. Yes, I do.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
So turquoise rock splash.
I feel briefly, it's difficult. I feel that the wilderness really doesn't exist. So this is a dreamscape, really. I don't think wilderness really does exist anywhere anymore, and it gives me a feeling of melancholy. They are quite sad, I think, these. And I imagine a world where the natural world has been restored, not necessarily without people, but we've moved aside and we've given it the respect and the space that it needs for itself and also for us. And of course, with the number of people on the planet and our needs, it's actually an impossible dream. So these are dreamscapes, really. I think people think, well, they're just ordinary landscapes, and they ask where they are. And I actually pretty much never paint places that exist. I mean, if I do these, they're always going to be something I've
dreamt about.
Yeah. And not necessarily hoped for in all cases, but I think we all have a dream of wilderness. We all have a dream that it still exists, because if it doesn't exist, it's rather desperate.
It's a bit more than bewildering.
It's
yes. So let's look at flotsam.
Yeah.
And this is human interaction in the wilderness.
Yes,
detritus.
It is a bit like that. It came from a swim. I found myself surrounded by jellyfish and plastic bags, and it sort of brought it to me. I was in Scotland, and what you would think as a pristine environment, but it really wasn't. But I also was, just purely artistically, I was looking at shapes and different textures on a board. So I was playing, but then the subject clearly came through as a.
And then the eponymously titled Unapproachable.
Yeah. If you went across that, you'd be bitten to pieces, I think, and you'd probably sink up to your neck in mud. So that would keep them off. That would keep the people who might dig for oil, drill for oil. They would have a problem doing it at the very least, and I quite like that idea.
Dreamt and stayed wild.
Yeah.
Okay, Imogen, we're going to go to the final slide now, and I think the final slide is it's not really a project.
No.
This is flora.
This is flora.
So you need to tell us about flora.
Flora, the idea of flora, yes, without appearing too mad, flora is I've described her here as my muse. It's actually a piece of sculpture made of wool, and it's Shetland wool, using the technique of Norwegian technique of nalbinding, or nalbinding, I think, and it just made a shape that is very organic and that can move around. You can pick it up, and you can drop it, and it'll look like something that might grow from a tree or might grow.
It's fungal.
So it represents flora and fauna, and in fact, flora is the goddess of growing things, and my work has involved flora quite a lot. She was director of urban heritage, which placed 5 blue plaques around the city of Oxford, which celebrated the lives and existence of 5 different wild plants. And one of them is still there on Quaking Bridge, Budlear, looking the worse for wear, waiting for me probably to go and do it up a bit. But it's been there since 2014. The others were variously taken and destroyed. I quite often do leave things around in the environment for people to pick up, take and destroy. That's not my practice that you see here, but that is an important part of my practice.
And flora's your muse.
Flora is the flora represents the respect that I feel we all need to have for the natural world, at our peril, if we don't begin to think about that then. And yes, I've been reading a lot, and one of the main things I've been reading is by a person called Robin Wall Kimmerer, and she wrote a book called Braiding Sweetgrass, and I've been listening to that, and I've been reading that, and yes, that I would recommend.
That's respect for plants.
Absolutely, respect. She's a botanist.
Yeah.
And she has a very essential respect for the natural world, which I admire.
That's excellent. So, Imogen, thank you. I think we're going to pause now, and we're going to take a break for just 2 or 3 minutes.
I think we'll slowly start again. I'm conscious that people want to get on with the other parts of their evening. So, Imogen, Steve would like to ask, hi, Nikki said is at Ovada, it was.
Yes, it's now at Art Source. It's now.
Sorry. Yes. I see, as in okay, was not the word was. The Warehouse Art School, sorry.
Yes.
I think you're both understanding whether you'd like to explain that to the other attendees, Imogen.
Yeah, yes, yes, I attended the Warehouse Art School when it was based at the Oxford Visual Arts Development Agency, which still exists and is a very lively place. But the Warehouse Art School has now moved to Art Source in East Oxford and is providing that education. So I haven't been there yet, but I'm going to be attending talks and workshops there. I think we're very lucky to have 2 very energetically run and well-run places for contemporary art. I think Oxford has had a dearth of these organisations, and we've really, I think these organisations are essential. They offer huge opportunities for people who want to challenge themselves. So yeah, but anyway, ArtSource is running.
Great, thank you for the reminder, Steve. He's also asking, how do the wilderness paintings, landscapes and seascapes relate to the Untidy Garden series?
Well, I think it was really, as I said, that I consider the garden as a wilderness, and it's quite an interesting thing, isn't it? Because if you were to say my garden's a wilderness, people would say, well, I know, what can you do? I mean, I use this kind of poison, or I use this kind of slug pellet, or and I'm using wilderness in such a positive way in the garden. But then when I'm making these seascapes and landscapes, I'm talking about the fact that people they don't see the wilderness under their noses. They go to try to find it. And in trying to find it and trying to discover these rather exotic places, they're probably doing more harm than good. And actually these places then cease to exist. I'm just recommending that people look under their noses to see what they have there. And if they did do that, they'd see how wonderful scrubland was, and they would fight harder against its drainage and development. Where people, development can happen in lots of places, but we seem to be developing in places that we need. And because these places don't have a commercial value, nobody puts a commercial value on them. Then
Aren't you also saying, Imogen, that particularly with your dreamscapes, as you described them, that we need to look inside as well as look outside?
Yes.
That some of the need to protect wilderness and to conserve the rest of nature is partly an external process, but it's partly an internal process. It's partly about
it's a desire that I think would be rather good if we all had more of. I think it is going in. It looks as though I'm going out into something rather bigger, but actually I am still very much close in my, yes, it's true, my head.
Thank you. There's the first question that was posed to us right at the beginning was, I think it was referring to Untidy Garden Orange, I'm pretty sure, because the person's asking or interested to find out what kind of ink that you're using with the oils in the red line painting near the visitor's book. So
that one. Okay.
But that must be to your right, Imogen, on the first wall.
That's round the corner. That's round the corner.
Oh, sorry, on the concrete wall. We don't have an image of it, I don't think, to show people. But at the same time, you might answer at the same time a question from Nikki about your mediums and the different paints you use. So maybe the ink you're using with the oils and also the different paints.
Yes, I tend to experiment a lot. And sometimes these experiments don't work, but mainly I think I'm becoming braver in a way, and I've discovered I really like to disrupt a canvas or a board before I might prepare it very carefully, but then I like to disrupt it. So lately I've been using ink to do that. This is a different use of ink in my Hawthorne series and in my Untidied Garden series. Those are very precise, but in the painting she's talking about, or they're talking about, and the landscapes and seascapes, I'm using ink to actually disrupt it so that I get an unexpected thing happening, and then I work with that. I avoid horizons. I sometimes get them anyway, but I don't aim for them. And I use acrylic. I often use acrylic on top of ink, and then oil somewhere, not everywhere, on top of that. Not necessarily, but these layers are built.
And are these water-bound inks or oil-bound inks?
No, they're water-bound
Water-bound
inks. They're water-bound inks because if I used oil, the acrylic wouldn't sit on the top. Yeah, so I use water inks and maybe just a splash. I mean, in these pieces here, the sea, the rocks and sand have actually moved the ink around the paper. It's very soft printing paper, and I haven't made those patterns. The natural world has made those patterns. I just put ink on, and that's what happened. And then, yeah, but I do that in the studio. I always paint in the studio, it's probably worth saying. I never paint outside. I always paint in the studio. I might sketch outside, but I deny myself the real view, and I never use photographs because I need things to go through my imagination before they come out onto the surface.
Thank you. There's one more question about that painting that unfortunately we don't have an image of. Heather's asking whether the ink you used in that is light proof.
That would be light proof, yes. That would be light proof. I know what she's saying. I once made, I thought, a rather delicately done little sketch for my mother. She loved hoverflies, and I made a lovely little sketch. I thought it was lovely, of hoverflies, very faithful little thing. And she put it in a window, and it disappeared within 6 months. And I was using, I know it's just really silly, but I was using a fugitive ink. No, I'm not using fugitive colors or inks. I'm using inks that stain, because I'm purposefully trying to stain, make a disruption, which I then use. So yeah, no, these would remain.
Thank you. A question from Anne Stewart. Now, I think we might know Anne Stewart, Imogen, and she was with us last night, if it's the same Anne Stewart.
Yes.
She said, thank you for a wonderful conversation. I was very interested in your discussion about the wall of sound. In one piece in particular, the A34 and the black cap, the sounds seem to leap out of the frame. I wonder if you can say a bit more about how you go about translating the sound you hear into your artwork.
It's very difficult to describe, because I do find the process extremely difficult and I'm struggling with it. But in some cases, I record the sound on my phone, and I have an app which produces a spectrogram, and the spectrogram guides me. I don't copy it, but I look at the patterns in it. And then it's like using a sketch. It's rather like using a sketch. And then I go from that to the final, maybe the final, or maybe the drawing before the final one. But I make a series until I hit on something that makes me think that I can hear the sound when I look at the drawing. I was very pleased last night to see I met a lot of people who said, I can hear that. And I thought I was terrifically pleased, because I had no idea whether people would be able to hear it or not. But I can hear the sound when I look at the drawing. I thought that was maybe just me. But I think you can see that in that particular one, the black cap is definitely struggling, and the road is definitely not struggling. And I've used colors which are rather human colors, and in that one I've used the natural world is in muted pencil colors or very pale ink, and the human world is Technicolor, and that's how I feel the sound comes across.
And the question also asked about your use of borders, and this is something we didn't talk about in this conversation, but we have at another time talked about. And in this piece, you've used a broken border. Yeah,
I break borders if I can. I don't like a frame. I mean, I have long conversations with a very good framer, and he knows I don't like a frame, and he does his best to disappear the frame. And I also make my own frame inside the frame sometimes, as in the black cap and A34. I've made a pencil frame, and then I can go beyond it. So it's a story, it's a narrative that the bird starts, and then the traffic starts, and the traffic continues, and the bird stops before the traffic ends. That is a narrative. I tend to use that if I can.
Great.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask the last couple of questions, or answer them. I think from Christine Darling, I can answer the one question, which is, will we get a copy of the recording? Yes. Everybody who attended this evening, including those who didn't manage to make it but wanted to attend, will get a link to the recording within the next few days, possibly early next week. Christine said she'd like to pass it to Catriona Bass, who's concerned with the Nature Recovery Project and is based in Ensham, where we are rewilding various areas. Mm-hmm. Christine was also asking, just going back to your paints and inks, assume you're using coloured inks like in watercolours?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I use quite a lot of black ink. The ink is really to make a mess of my surface. I mean, not in every piece of work, but I do use that more and more. I mean, I might just pour black ink onto a white surface and then let it dry, leave the studio, go for a walk, come back and see what I have. And that's when I've very carefully prepared a surface, perhaps on a board. I've really prepared it with several layers of white paint, and then yeah, I use it often to disrupt. If I'm making ink drawings, then I use a mixture of ink and acrylic, and also pen. So ink pens I use quite a bit too, because they have the most delicious bright colours. In my Untidied series, I've got a bright orange, bright yellow, bright pink going on, a bright blue, which you can only get with inks, really. In watercolours, it's very difficult to get the colours, the really bright colours that I need. But in the landscape, seascapes, I like a turquoise ink, lovely as well. But I tend to splash these inks on in a way that surprises me on purpose.
The last question is from Elizabeth Ratcliffe, and it really brings it back to your garden, which I think is where this all started. She's asked, have you found that you attract more animals to your garden?
Yes, we do. We don't really mention them, but we do. I think that animals are so threatened. A lot of mammals are so threatened nowadays that when we get them, we admire them. Yeah, we've had all sorts of mammals in the garden. I'm sure they eat everybody's vegetables and fruit, and I'm sure they do. And I think we give shelter to some. We don't actually have sets in our garden, but I think we have temporary shelters for things. But so far, no neighborhood chicken has been taken on our watch. Our chickens were occasionally, but only because we didn't, we had mad hens that would run off before they needed to go to bed, and stuff like that would happen. But yeah, they don't do any damage, and we watch them respectfully, and yeah. But it really, what's fascinating, because I think people do like a nice large mammal, an iconic mammal. But what really fascinates me is the bee that I can't identify. And that I never will identify, because as soon as I've tried to, another bee of a different kind has come into the picture. My wonder really exists in this inability to document what I have.
And I think, Imogen, I think that's one of the aspects of your work, that it leads us to that consideration, that actually, I think we do have an innate tendency to be attracted to the
panda,
well, it's to creatures that are on the same scale as we are. I think that's a natural response.
Yes.
But actually, being drawn to the incredible diversity of the rest of nature at a microcosmic level is very important, and it's something that your work does tangentially. It doesn't say it to us directly, but it leads us there. I think it is so important You know, the environment is big, but actually it's also very, very, very small.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a wonderful place to end. I really wanted to say thank you to Richard for such thoughtful questions and comments about Imogen's work and really guiding the conversation very, very well. So thank you, Richard. And to Imogen for teaching us about the small. I think it just continually reminding us through every work in the show how to look at works, sorry, not the works, but works in nature differently, how to appreciate works in every season, what all the plants are doing, and not to, spring and summer are so wonderful, but we spend the rest of our time walking, don't we, in the autumn and the winter, and really valuing those times of the year. And as you say, the potential that we ignore in nature, and teaching us to look closer, look outside and pay attention. So thank you very much for that, and for everybody for joining us this evening. Please can I just implore everybody who's in Oxford or anywhere nearby within driving distance to come and see the exhibition. It ends on Saturday the 21st of May. We'll be open on that Saturday 12 till 4 and every other day 10 till 4 during the week. And you will get a recording and the works online, and a catalogue of Imogen's exhibition is on our website, on her exhibition page. So please engage with the show, and we hope to see you. Thank you very much.